Hey guys! Tonight, we board a creaky old junk ship under a velvet sky that doesn't seem to end. The sea beneath you is almost too quiet, like it's holding its breath. The sails above your head flap just enough to let you know they're listening. You're surrounded by the salty musk of damp ropes and bamboo planks, somewhere between terrified and oddly peaceful. A single lantern swings from a mast, casting ghostly shadows that dance on the water. This is where we begin. You've just stepped into the world of the most terrifying boss you've never heard of, Zheng Yi Sao, the pirate queen who basically ran a floating empire and laughed in the face of every rule book she didn't write herself. Now, don't get too comfortable just yet. You're on a pirate ship, and statistically speaking, you probably won't survive this. But hey, it's bedtime, so that's someone else's problem. So guys, I need your help. 20th September, my birthday. Can we please hit 5,000 subscribers? This would mean a lot to me, so let's start. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Always cool to see where this little bedtime ship is sailing to. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hear a seagull scream above you. Rude. It flaps away into the fog, while your bare feet inch closer to the rail of the junk ship, rocking gently in the Pearl River Delta. You're somewhere near Canton, sometime in the early 1800s. It's not exactly a spa weekend, but it's quieter than you expected. The moon finally peeks through the clouds, and below your feet stretches the ghost of an empire, Zheng Yi Sao's empire. And if you're wondering, what even is a Zheng Yi Sao? Well, she's the pirate queen who broke every rule of gender, law, and survival without blinking. Born sometime around 1775, she started her career not on a ship, but in a brothel. Yep, from the red light district to the red flag fleet, her rise was less rags to riches and more awkward dinner party to absolute legend. You hear the wind pick up, and a thin voice hums a melody nearby. It's probably just a sailor trying to stay awake during watch. Or a ghost. Could go either way. Either way, Zheng Yi Sao's story begins not on this ship, but on land, under very different lanterns. You imagine her as a young girl in the bustling streets of Canton, or maybe Shundai. Records get a little foggy here because when you're a girl born into poverty in 18th century China, no one writes you down unless you do something wild. She was probably sold to a brothel by her family. Brutal? Yes. Uncommon? No. But here's where she flips the script. Most women in her position might have barely scraped by. Zheng Yi Sao, whose birth name was likely Shi Yang or Shi Yangu, charmed, negotiated, and listened. And what did she listen to most? Men. Rich, powerful ones, full of secrets. And when they talked, she remembered everything. Now, cue the dramatic entrance of Zheng Yi, a powerful pirate captain. The dude rolls up to Canton one day, strolls into her brothel, and instead of paying for an hour, he proposes marriage. Romantic? Kind of. Strategic? Very. She didn't just marry him, she negotiated equal power over his fleet. Equal power, as in, if I'm in this, I run this. Historians still argue whether Zheng Yi actually loved her or just saw her as a brilliant political mind. Either way, the result was a power couple with cannons and zero tolerance for betrayal. Under the surface, they started building something no one saw coming. Zheng Yi was already leading the Red Flag fleet, one of several pirate crews doing their own chaotic thing along the coast. But after their marriage, with Zheng Yi Sao's brains behind the operation, they started absorbing the others. No cannonballs, just contracts and charm, and probably some light threats. You lean on the rail and glance out at the mist curling across the deck. It's surprisingly quiet for a ship full of criminals, but Zheng Yi Sao didn't tolerate chaos. She made order from ocean spray. And let's be clear, this wasn't some scrappy band of misfits. At its peak, her pirate federation had around 80,000 members. 80,000! That's more than the population of some cities. She controlled hundreds of ships, each color-coded by rank. Red flags? That's the elite. Blue? Not so much. It was like Hogwarts, but with more swords and fewer owls. A rat scurries past your foot. Not exactly the vibe you want right now, but hey, this is pirate living. You walk further into the deck shadows where the wood creaks beneath your toes. You wonder what kind of laws exist in the floating city. Spoiler, she made her own, and they were intense, but we'll get to those soon. Back to the love story. For all the skeptics, Zheng Yi and his wife weren't exactly hosting dinner parties. Their marriage was a power merger, forged in strategy. And then, 6 years in, boom, he dies. Some say it was a typhoon, others whisper about betrayal. Historians still argue whether he fell overboard, was assassinated, or just succumbed to bad dumplings. Regardless, the sea takes him, and just like that, the fleet's in limbo. Thousands of pirates, dozens of captains, and not a single clear heir. Enter Zheng Yi Sao in widow's robes, standing calmly at the helm of the flagship. She doesn't beg, plead, or hide behind tears. She says, "I'll run this now." You'd expect mutiny. Instead, she wins loyalty from most of her captains, including her late husband's adopted son, Cheng Po-tsai, a 15-year-old with a sharp jawline and sharper instincts. We'll get to him later. Oh yes, it gets messy. But for now, your eyes drift to the horizon. Lanterns glow faintly on nearby ships. You count 5, 6, 10. All part of her growing armada. It's oddly cozy, like a deadly floating neighborhood. This isn't some bedtime fairy tale. It's a ghost story in reverse. You're not being haunted by her. You're walking alongside her, watching her sharpen her empire under moonlight. And trust me, this is just the warm-up. The sea stretches out like dark silk, rippling softly under the keel of the ship you're standing on. You hear the low rumble of a gong in the distance. Somewhere out in the mist, another vessel signals its nightly routine. Maybe a sentry swap, maybe a silent warning. Either way, it echoes through the floating kingdom now ruled by a woman who wasn't even supposed to survive her childhood. And yet here she is, Zheng Yi Sao, running the most organized pirate confederation in history. After Zheng Yi's death, the power vacuum should have torn the Red Flag fleet apart. Imagine it, dozens of ambitious captains, thousands of battle-hardened sailors, and a leadership spot suddenly up for grabs. It's like giving a room full of cats one bowl of tuna and locking the door. But she doesn't flinch, doesn't panic. Instead, she meets with the key captains, one by one, in secret, and locks in their loyalty with promises, favors, and iron resolve. You lean back against a pile of coiled rope, listening to the creak of wood and the gentle splash of water. Above, the stars are barely visible, but somehow you feel like she's looking out across them, plotting her next move. Which brings us to Cheng Po Tsai. Ah, yes, the adopted son slash protege slash also sorta husband. Pirate life gets weird fast. Let's rewind. Zheng Yi and his wife had adopted Cheng Po Tsai when he was still a teen. He'd been captured during a raid, then recruited, trained, and eventually treated like a son. After Zheng Yi's death, Zheng Yi Sao solidifies her hold on the fleet by taking Cheng Po as her lover and eventually her husband. And yes, historians still argue whether this was love, strategy, or some spicy combination of both. But it worked. With Cheng Po by his side, young, daring, beloved by the sailors, she had muscle, charm, and legacy all rolled into one. You imagine the two of them standing together on the quarterdeck, her with her sharp eyes and iron spine, he with the confidence of someone who's never truly failed. Not yet, anyway. And now that she had the throne, time to build the empire. She didn't just inherit the Red Flag fleet. She absorbed all the other fleets too. Black, white, yellow, blue, and green. Each with its own hierarchy, loyalties, and grudges. But she brought them into the fold under a new system that was part mafia, part democracy, part terrifying HR department. You're probably imagining chaos, pirates brawling in the galleys, stabbing each other over chicken bones. Nope. Zheng Yi Sao ran a tight, almost bureaucratic ship. She instated a code of laws so strict it made imperial officials look like laid-back yoga teachers. Break rank without permission? You're beheaded. Steal from the collective stash? Also beheaded. Sexual assault? Beheaded and tossed overboard, because apparently even pirate queens draw a line somewhere. But here's the twist. She wasn't cruel for the sake of it. Her code protected civilians. If a pirate robbed a poor village, they had to return the goods, sometimes with interest. If a pirate harmed a female captive, executed, no questions. It wasn't just discipline, it was branding. Zheng Yi Sao was building a reputation. She wanted locals to prefer pirate rule to imperial rule. And in many cases, they did. Her ships provided protection, fair trade, and something the Qing government wasn't great at, reliability. You duck into the ship's mess, where a small lamp flickers over a pot of rice. The room is empty now, but you can feel the ghosts of stories whispered here. Sailors talking about how the fleet pulled off another wild blockade, or how another provincial governor paid tribute just to avoid trouble. Rumor had it that even imperial officials were secretly in her pocket. And then there's the fringe stuff. Pirates whispering that Zheng Yi Sao could control the wind, or that she used talismans to curse enemy ships. Sailor superstition, sure, but when you command 70,000 people and the sea seems to listen when you talk, rumors write themselves. Historians still argue whether Zheng Yi Sao believed in that supernatural edge or simply encouraged the myths to keep Seer in the air. Either way, it worked. Her reputation became so fearsome that some ships would surrender just at the sight of her red sails on the horizon. You hear a thud overhead, probably just a loose rope swinging in the night. You stay seated, comforted oddly by the rhythms of this strange world. Despite the beheadings and the political marriages and the endless sea, there's a weird sense of order here. She built something brutal, yes, but also strangely fair. Now here's a juicy tidbit the textbooks tend to skip. Zheng Yi Sao's fleet had a proto-socialist streak. Pirates got paid from loot based on a system of shares. The captains didn't just hoard treasure. Most of it went into a communal fund, stored at secure outposts along the coast. If your ship was damaged in battle, you could get repairs covered. If you were injured, the fund supported you.
Retirement? Yep, pirates could essentially retire with benefits. Let that sink in while you remember your job doesn't even give dental. This wasn't just piracy, it was infrastructure. She established supply chains, training routines, even floating hospitals. Imagine drifting into a cove with a fever and some guy in a red flag uniform asks you if you've met your quota and taken your meds. Weirdly comforting, honestly. But Zheng Yi Sao wasn't just playing pirate queen. She was playing chess with the entire Chinese coastline. And the Qing government? Oh, they noticed. They tried sending fleets to chase her down, again and again and again. And each time she either outmaneuvered them or bribed their commanders to just look the other way. A few well-timed silver coins, a whispered threat about their families, and suddenly the Navy forgot how to sail. She made emperors look incompetent. She turned provinces into whisper networks. She was building not just a fleet, but a government at sea. You step back onto the deck, where the wind is picking up. In the distance, the sky is bruised purple and storm clouds are on the move. But somehow, you don't worry. Because if there's one person who's not afraid of storms, it's Zheng Yi Sao. And the night is still young.
It's early morning now. The waves slap gently against the hull, and the salty air smells less like battle and more like breakfast. Somewhere on the main deck, someone's probably stirring a pot of fish porridge, pirate style. But even in this calm moment, you can feel it in your bones. This empire on water is always in motion. Beneath Zheng Yi Sao's velvet grip, the red flag fleet has become a force bigger than the sea itself. And it's still expanding. So, how exactly do you run a pirate empire that stretches from the Gulf of Tonkin all the way up the Pearl River Delta? Well, imagine a startup with 70,000 employees and no Wi-Fi. That's what Zheng Yi Sao was managing, and she did it all without Excel spreadsheets or Slack notifications. Her secret? Delegation, with a very sharp edge. She divided her fleet into 6 color-coded squadrons, each with its own commander, its own stretch of coastline, and its own set of ships. But they weren't free to freelance. Oh no, everything filtered back up to her. Loot tallies, ship repairs, crew assignments, even conflict resolution. If you had beef with another captain, you didn't duel it out with sabers. You filed a report and waited for your queen's ruling. It sounds ridiculous until you realize it worked. The red flag fleet started to feel less like pirates and more like a floating nation. And Zheng Yi Sao, she was its empress. No crown, no throne, just command and a really terrifying glare when things went sideways. You stroll past the armory, where swords hang neatly in rows, each one polished, balanced, cared for. These pirates weren't sloppy, they were professionals, and they trained like it too. Drills on land, target practice with cannons, formation sailing in stormy weather. She knew that keeping the fleet sharp meant survival. One clumsy maneuver, one sleepy lookout, and the whole system could crumble. But there's a deeper magic in her control: loyalty. It wasn't just fear that held the crew together, it was belief. They believed in her, in the order she created, in the future she promised. When sailors were injured or aging out, she made sure they were cared for. She allowed marriages among crew. She permitted captives to join the ranks if they proved themselves. And sometimes she even threw a feast. That's right, pirate banquets were a thing. Picture it: long wooden tables on the sand, lanterns swaying in the sea breeze, plates piled with roast duck and river eel. Zheng Yi Sao would walk among her captains, listening more than she spoke, her fingers adorned with jade rings, each one a silent message, one for loyalty, one for betrayal, one for the next port they take. Her silence spoke louder than cannon fire. But even queens have rivals.
And you can bet the Chinese imperial court wasn't about to let a pirate armada take over half its coastline without a hissy fit. The emperor's advisors, red-faced and flustered, began scrambling to contain her. Naval generals were dispatched with larger and more expensive fleets. Envoys were sent to negotiate, or at least stall her long enough to regroup. Now here's the spicy bit. Some of those envoys, they switched sides. Historians still argue whether these defectors were bribed, coerced, or genuinely inspired by her leadership. One famous tale involves a Qing official who, upon boarding her flagship for a parley, found himself so impressed by her authority that he just kind of stayed. Imagine trying to arrest someone and ending up asking them for a job. You lean against the mast, the sun now peeking over the horizon. Light dances on the water, and a few deckhands are already climbing the rigging, unfurling sails like silk banners. The ships around you form a silent web, organized, deadly, and waiting for her next signal. Now's a good time to remind you of something deeply weird. There are records that suggest Zheng Yi Sao may have had spies inside the Imperial Navy. Let that sink in. Not just bribed generals, but actual infiltrators passing along battle plans, supply lists, and intel about incoming raids. It's like the Qing were trying to play chess and didn't realize their opponent had the rulebook, the timer, and also their queen was on fire. But maybe the strangest fringe story? Some say she used a secret network of coastal villagers who functioned like early surveillance satellites. Fishermen, port clerks, even monks, sending word up the chain when warships moved or rice convoys passed through. These whisper networks were the veins of her operation. No sail moved without her knowing. You sip from a chipped ceramic cup. Strong tea, maybe a bit too bitter, but it clears your mind. Because as all of this unfolds, you start to feel something building. This isn't just about stealing treasure anymore. It's about governance, about territory, about legacy. Zheng Yi Sao is becoming more than a pirate queen. She's becoming a threat to the very idea of empire. And the emperor? He's starting to lose sleep. But it's not just the Qing dynasty that's panicking. Enter the Europeans. Yep, the colonial busybodies have entered the chat. The Portuguese, those self-appointed traffic cops of the South China Sea, start losing ships to her raids. Their traders complain, their military commanders scowl, and suddenly you've got Western warships dipping their toes into the chaos, unsure whether they're here to fight pirates or to cut backroom deals. Historians still debate whether Zheng Yi Sao actively antagonized the European fleets or simply didn't care about their flags. To her, a ship was a ship, ripe for plundering, and if it had cannons, even better, more toys for her floating arsenal. A quirky fact here. Sailors in her fleet were sometimes given translations of foreign commands. Think of it as the Rosetta Stone of piracy. This way, they could interpret signals, eavesdrop on enemy chatter, and even impersonate Western officers if needed. I mean, who does that? Only someone who thinks globally before LinkedIn was even a thing. By the end of this stretch of the story, it's clear she isn't reacting to the world, she's shaping it. Zheng Yi Sao stands not on the edge of rebellion, but on the precipice of something far bigger, rewriting the power map of East Asia. But even an ocean queen can't rule forever. You feel it too, don't you? That subtle shift in the wind, the kind that whispers change.
The sea air feels heavier today. It clings to your skin like wet parchment, and the waves no longer roll playfully. They pulse with a kind of slow tension. You're not alone in feeling it. Across the red flag fleet, sails flap a little too loudly, boots thud a little too sharply on the planks. There's a rumor, passed like a mug of rice wine between decks. Zheng Yi is dead. No one wants to believe it, but there it is. the man who co-founded this empire, who ruled the tides alongside Zheng Yi Sao, was swept away by a storm, or so they say. Some whisper it was a boating accident, others say he was assassinated. A few think he faked his own death and is sipping coconut juice on a secret island. Historians still argue whether Zheng Yi's death was natural, staged, or part of some dark coup. But no matter how he died, this is where the story pivots. Because instead of collapsing under the weight of grief, Zheng Yi Sao does something that shocks everyone. Again, she takes full control of the Red Flag fleet. Now, you might be thinking, wait, wasn't she already in charge? Technically, yes. Spiritually, emotionally, organizationally, absolutely. But now, she's no longer co-ruling. She's the undisputed queen flying solo over a pirate empire that includes tens of thousands of sailors, hundreds of ships, and a whole economy of bribery, taxation, and negotiation. You wander down into the belly of the ship, ducking low wooden beams and stepping over cargo nets. Here's where the real work happens. Here's where Zheng Yi Sao tightens her grip, not with muscle, but with rules. Yes, rules. She rolled out a revised pirate code. Think of it as an HR manual if HR wore dragon-embroidered robes and sentenced you to death for stealing a dumpling. The code covered everything: how loot was divided, how disputes were settled, how prisoners were treated, and importantly, what happened if you betrayed the fleet. Spoiler, it was not a slap on the wrist. If you disobeyed orders, beheading. If you assaulted a female prisoner, immediate execution. If you stole from the common pool of loot, say goodbye to your limbs. It sounds brutal, and yeah, it was. But it also created something rare for pirates: order. And that order is what helped the Red Flag fleet flourish when most pirate crews barely lasted a season. And here's the kicker. She backed it up not with brute strength, but with social intelligence. Remember that handsome lieutenant we mentioned earlier? His name was Zheng Pao Tsai, a young, charismatic pirate adopted by Zheng Yi and later, let's just say, very close to Zheng Yi Sao. After her husband's death, she elevated him, both romantically and militarily. She made her her right hand, her partner, her co-commander. The two of them formed a power duo that was military alliance, part romantic novella. Historians still argue whether Zheng Pao Tsai was truly in love with Zheng Yi Sao or if he was playing the long game. Either way, the chemistry was there. Together, they led naval assaults, negotiated political standoffs, and reshaped the fleet's structure like a pair of ruthless wedding planners. Meanwhile, the Chinese government is losing it. They try everything: military attacks, bribes, propaganda campaigns. They paint her as a witch, a monster, a threat to civilization. But the more they attack, the more people flock to her. Disgruntled sailors, desperate farmers, outlaws with nowhere to go, they all find a home in the Red Flag fleet. And with each new recruit, her legend grows. You step back on the upper deck, squinting at the coastline ahead. A small village lies nestled between two jagged hills. It's the next target, one of many tiny puzzle pieces in her campaign for total coastal control. But here's the twist. She doesn't always attack. Sometimes she negotiates. Sometimes she sets up protection rackets. Sometimes she installs puppet leaders who quietly pledge loyalty in exchange for pirate security services. That's right. She invented the pirate franchise model. Fringe rumors suggest she even had informants inside the imperial bureaucracy. Clerks, dockmasters, minor officials,
all paid to look the other way or pass on helpful documents. And let's not ignore the whispers that she had a network of female spies, wives of fishermen, innkeepers, market vendors, who reported back with gossip and intel. You feel the ship shudder slightly as anchors are drawn up. The fleet is on the move again, like a giant sea serpent awakening from a nap. Zheng Yi Sao is standing on the forward deck of her flagship, her red cloak snapping in the breeze like a warning. She's not grieving anymore. She's building. And yet, as her grip tightens, cracks begin to show. Whispers of dissent swirl among lower-ranking captains. Some feel Jiang Pao Sai is getting too much power. Others wonder if Zheng Yi Sao is spreading the fleet too thin. The Portuguese, nursing their wounds from earlier defeats, begin talks with the Chinese dynasty about joining forces. In one corner of your mind, the tension hums louder. You know what's coming. Every empire has an apex, and every apex has a tilt. But for now, as the ships glide forward like ghosts over water, Zheng Yi Sao rules absolutely.
The sun rises slower when you're dreading change. You stand on the upper deck of a battered but still proud red flag ship, watching the faint shimmer of gold pull itself over the horizon like it's hesitating too. The sea looks the same, but it's not. You know it, the crew knows it, and somewhere out there, Zheng Yi Sao knows it too. Because the balance is tipping. Not all at once. Not in a blaze of cannon fire or mutiny. No, this is a quieter unraveling, the kind that starts with whispers and ends with missing ships. Your fleet is still large, still intimidating, but cracks are forming. Allies are becoming unreliable. Chang Po Sai has stopped smiling. You hear murmurs about the Cantonese Green Flag Fleet, a rival pirate coalition now emboldened by Zheng Yi Sao's perceived weakness. Then there's the Imperial Navy, of course, bolstered by their shiny new Portuguese buddies and an ever-growing list of grievances. You feel it most clearly when docking for a brief resupply at a coastal village that once bent the knee without hesitation. This time, a few hesitant bows, a few fewer offerings. One little boy even sticks his tongue out before hiding behind a basket of dried squid. Rude. You know what's worse than being feared? Being doubted. Zheng Yi Sao hasn't lost yet, but doubt is spreading faster than scurvy on a long voyage. Still, she doesn't flinch. In fact, this is when she doubles down. At her command, the Red Flag Fleet initiates a bold blockade at the mouth of the Pearl River. Nothing in, nothing out. A logistical nightmare for everyone inland. And a power play that screams, yes, I still run this. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In late 1809, Zheng Yi Sao's fleet completely shut down commerce into Canton for weeks. The economy wobbled. The Qing court panicked. But fringe theory time. Ready for this? Some historians believe she used coded poems passed through fish merchants to coordinate attacks and resupply efforts. Literal haikus of war. Imagine getting a love note in octosyllabic verse only to realize it's actually a schedule for coordinated ship raids. And just when things start to feel stable again, a new enemy slides onto the board like a knife through silk. Wu Bao, the infamous pirate turned government lackey. Wu Bao used to be one of them, red flag trained, risen through the ranks, and even reportedly involved in mapping secret naval routes for Zheng Yi Sao herself. But he defected, took his knowledge, flipped the script, and now sails with the Imperial Navy like he never even swabbed a deck. You listen in on a late-night meeting below deck. Zheng Yi Sao stands at the center, holding a map dotted with red beans. Her voice is calm, too calm. That eerie kind of calm that comes just before someone either cries or commits arson. She says, "We taught him everything.
Now he wants to teach us humility. Chung Po Sai leans in, so we teach him regret. A plan forms, not revenge, containment. She sends smaller, faster ships to intercept Wu Bao's new fleet, not to destroy him, not yet, just to frustrate him, disrupt his supply lines, humiliate him in small doses, the kind of warfare that erodes a man's reputation rather than his ship. Historians still argue whether this strategy was wise or too personal. Wu Bao wasn't the biggest threat after all. But maybe that's the point. Zheng Yi Sao never liked being betrayed. She didn't just punish betrayal. She made examples of it. You're sent on one of those missions. Silent. Surgical. Your job? Steal 3 crates of gunpowder from Wu Bao's latest stock and replace them with flour. Why flour? Because when he lights that cannon and it sneezes instead of explodes, everyone laughs. And while all this cat and mouse stuff is happening, the Portuguese start building floating fortresses, literal barges covered in cannon turrets and armored shields, anchored off the coast like floating middle fingers. The battle lines are no longer fluid, they're fixed. And that's dangerous for someone who drives on movement. One night, Zheng Yi Sao walks the deck alone. You follow, a respectful distance behind, listening to her whispering to the sea like it's an old friend. She's changing, she says. She wants someone new. Who? You ask, before you can stop yourself. She doesn't turn around. Anyone but me. It's the first time you've ever heard her sound tired. Not defeated, just aware. Aware that even empires at sea eventually find a shore. The tides, once loyal, are testing their options.
You're drying salted fish on the deck, again, when it happens. A courier junk, small and splintery, flags you down with a white rag tied to a bamboo stick. The poor kid rowing it is barely taller than the cannonball. His face is red from paddling against the tide, but his message is sharp as a cutlass. The emperor wants to talk. Cue the dramatic silence. No one speaks for a long beat. Even the fish stop sizzling under the sun like they know this is serious. Zheng Yi Sao reads the message herself, holds it like it's a grenade made of silk. The imperial court is offering negotiations, terms, possibly amnesty. Let's be honest, you've been expecting this. After the Red Flag Fleet humiliated the Qing Navy, made a fool out of the Portuguese, and pulled off surprise maneuvers like a sleep-deprived chess grandmaster, what choice did the empire have? Zheng Yi Sao calls a council. You all sit in a semicircle, cross-legged on woven mats. The air smells like old fish, gunpowder, and suspense. She doesn't ask for opinions, not really, but her eyes scan each face like a general assessing battlefield terrain. One captain mutters, "It's a trap." Another shrugs, "Maybe, but traps can be re-rigged." It's Chung Po Chai who lays it out. "This could be the last time we hold the sword by the hilt, not the blade." He's changed. Less swagger, more strategy. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's exhaustion. Or maybe he just wants to spend the rest of his life somewhere that doesn't involve salt water in his underwear. Zheng Yi Sao nods slowly. We'll hear them out. And just like that, you're heading into port. Not to raid, not to retreat, but to negotiate with the empire you've been annoying for over a decade. Here's your mainstream history bit. In 1810, Zheng Yi Sao and her forces did in fact meet with Qing officials and begin the process of surrender. But surrender is a strong word for what went down. Because here's the kicker. She negotiates on her terms.
You anchor just outside Canton. Imperial envoys arrive in boats polished so hard you can see your own startled face in the wood grain. They expect trembling pirates, folded hands, desperate groveling. Instead, they get a pirate queen in full regalia, standing tall, flanked by 17 ships armed to the teeth, and crews that could cut your throat mid-yawn and still ask what's for dinner. You're posted on lookout duty, which gives you the perfect view of the strangest sight yet. Zheng Yi Sao casually walking across a wooden plank onto the Imperial vessel like she owns it. And honestly, she kind of does. She doesn't bow, doesn't flinch, just listens, and then speaks. Here's the fringe detail that's never officially confirmed. Some say she brought her own translator, not because she didn't speak formal Mandarin, but because she wanted everything double-checked. She wasn't about to lose her empire over bad grammar. Historians still argue whether the emperor was amused, offended, or low-key terrified. Maybe all three, but they couldn't deny one thing. Zheng Yi Sao was not someone you could simply erase. The terms? Not what you'd expect from a surrender. She asks for full pardons for herself, Chung Po Chai, and thousands of her pirates. She requests permission for them to keep their loot, start legitimate lives, and even join the imperial forces as naval officers. And she gets most of it. Let that sink in. You've spent your life breaking the empire's rules, and now you're getting invited to rewrite them. Some sailors cheer, others cry. A few throw up from the emotional whiplash. You're just trying to decide if you want to be a fisherman, a merchant, or, heaven forbid, a tax collector. A week later, the fleet begins disbanding. Flags are lowered, sails are folded like well-worn shirts going into permanent storage. The decks grow quieter, the nights longer. You pass Zheng Yi Sao one evening as she walks the deck alone. No fanfare, no guards, just her, the sea, and the quiet hum of a new life on the horizon. "You good?" you ask. She nods, but doesn't stop walking. You think she'll miss it, this life. The rush, the danger, the salt in your teeth and fire in your lungs. But she's earned her peace. She built a literal floating nation, ruled it with absolute precision, and got out without being executed. Or worse, forgotten. And just for the record, not a single one of those Portuguese captains ever got a deal half as sweet.
You're standing on dry land for the first time in years, and it feels weird. Your knees keep doing this wobble thing, like they forgot what it means to walk without the ground shifting underfoot. A merchant gives you a funny look as you stumble past, and honestly, fair. You look like a shipwreck survivor who accidentally wandered into a job interview. The transition is surreal. One minute you're scraping barnacles off a cannon, the next you're learning how to file customs paperwork. You, the same pirate who used to threaten tax collectors with a machete, are now becoming one. Somewhere, the universe is laughing. And yet, there's something oddly peaceful about it. Zheng Yi Sao's deal with the Qing government changes everything. She and Cheng Po Chai are officially out of the piracy game. Most of the Red Flag fleet is pardoned. A few even become part of the Imperial Navy, now wearing crisp uniforms instead of stolen coats with bloodstains. You've never seen so many pirates try to look dignified. It's like watching stray cats pretend to be librarians. Your new gig is technically coastal enforcement. You patrol the same waters you once terrorized, but now you carry a little tin badge and a clipboard. It's deeply confusing. Here's your mainstream fact for the evening. Zheng Yi Sao did retire into legitimacy, not just in the hang up your cutlass and raise goats kind of way, but with real status. She opened a gambling house in Guangdong, lived comfortably, and was widely respected, even feared, in her old age. And she did it all without ever being captured, exiled, or executed. But let's rewind a second, because the months right after disbanding aren't smooth sailing. Some captains can't let go. You hear rumors, ghost ships that refuse to surrender, small crews still hitting trade routes under new flags. Most burn out quickly. A few go down in desperate blaze of glory skirmishes. Zheng Yi Sao sends envoys to talk them down. Some come in, others vanish into the mist. You feel the shift slowly. At first, the town looks at you sideways. No one likes a pirate, even a reformed one. But then a merchant's son recognizes you from an old raid, and instead of turning you in, he asks for a story. You tell it. Just the edited version. And soon you're a curiosity, a relic from a wilder time. Hey, weren't you part of the Red Flag Fleet? A girl at the market asks one day while weighing dried plums. You nod. She whistles. That's crazy. My uncle says you people used to eat your enemies. Which is definitely not true. Well, mostly not. You grin and grab your plums. Meanwhile, Zheng Yi Sao isn't exactly fading into obscurity. She starts investing. Real estate, shipping contracts, local politics. Nothing flashy, but all powerful. She doesn't crave attention. She craves leverage. And Cheng Po Chai? He becomes a captain in the Imperial Navy. Let that irony wash over you for a second. The same guy who once painted obscene cartoons of Qing officers on the sails of captured ships now works for them. But he's good at it. Probably because he knows all the pirate tricks. There's one story, unconfirmed of course, that during a formal ceremony, Cheng Po Chai accidentally called a high-ranking official barnacle brain in Cantonese slang in front of an entire delegation. Historians still argue whether this was intentional sabotage or just a bad habit slipping out. Either way, the man survives with his career mostly intact. As for you, you find yourself missing the chaos sometimes. The cannon fire, the sea shanties, the bizarre mid-storm weddings between deckhands and seagulls. Long story. But mostly, you're just grateful to not wake up every morning wondering if today's the day you get blown into the stratosphere by a Portuguese frigate. Here's your fringe tidbit for the section. One urban legend claims Zheng Yi Sao buried part of her fortune in a hidden cave on Lantau Island, guarded not by traps, but by contracts. Supposedly, the only way to unlock it is by proving direct descent and perfect bookkeeping. No one succeeded. Yet. You walk through town these days with less caution. The kids no longer run away when they see your tattoos. The shopkeepers greet you by name. Some even ask your advice. Hey, you've traveled. How dangerous is the Sulu Sea? You think about it. You say, well, it depends on, are you trying to fish, trade, or start an accidental war? He laughs. You don't clarify. You hear rumors about Zheng Yi Sao growing her empire in quieter ways. She brokers peace between rival merchant guilds, lends money, at fair rates, but always with terms. Some say she writes under a fake name, publishing anonymous treatises on maritime law. Others claim she retired to raise goats on a mountain, shouting at clouds when they forget to rain. But the truth is more subtle. She just stops needing to prove anything. She did the impossible. She ruled the South China Sea, defied empires, and walked away on her own terms. She never apologized, never bent the knee. She simply changed the game and then stepped off the board, while still ahead. You still meet with old crew sometimes, at tea houses, at dockside food stalls, at festivals where fireworks remind you of cannon blasts. You raise a glass and toast the woman who made all this possible. To Zheng Yi Sao, someone says. To the Queen of the Sea, you echo. And as the night drapes over the town, you feel a strange comfort. Not just safety, but purpose.
A quiet legacy. A reminder that once, for a shining moment, you were part of something vast, fierce, and unforgettable.
The years roll by, and with them, the memory of your old life becomes softer, like sea glass worn down by tide and time. But it never vanishes. You still walk like a sailor, still scan the horizon when you hear gulls, still sleep better with one foot on the floor. You live inland now, not too far, just a few hills beyond the coast, but far enough that you no longer wake to the smell of brine and tar. Your neighbors know you as the quiet one who used to work at sea, and you let that description stand. It's easier than explaining that you once ran messages for a pirate queen who could dismantle a fleet with a squint. Zheng Yi Sao rarely visits these days, but when she does, it's an event. Her sedan chair rolls through the dusty lanes like a visiting monarch. Technically, she's just a respected businesswoman. Unofficially, she's still the ruler of every room she enters. Last time, she brought pastries. You remember her sitting at your small wooden table, picking at lotus seed buns and listening to your complaints about local taxes. Just bribe the assessor, she said, like she was recommending a tea house. Then she winked. Or marry his cousin. You laughed for the first time in weeks. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the night. Zheng Yi Sao really did retire into wealth and relative obscurity. She lived until 1844, dying peacefully at the age of 69, an absurdly old age for someone who spent their early years dodging cannonballs and commanding fleets. And she did it all without ever being captured. That's the wild part. She wasn't imprisoned. She wasn't executed. She wasn't erased. She won, and then she walked away. Meanwhile, you've started teaching. Not officially. There's no chalkboard or certificates. But neighborhood kids drop by your porch to hear stories. You tell them about storms and sea battles, about clever tricks with vinegar and shark skin, about why you never trust a man who keeps his compass too clean. You leave out the blood. But sometimes, in the silence between stories, you remember it all in vivid, uncomfortable detail. The screams, the smoke, the way your heart pounded in those chaotic minutes before impact. You keep those memories locked up, like old maps to dangerous places. Some knowledge doesn't need to be passed down. Yet here comes your quirky tidbit. Some scholars claim Zheng Yi Sao hosted secret reunions for her former captains every few years. No records, no names, just rumor and whispers. A ship would dock under a forgotten flag, lanterns would burn late into the night, and by morning nothing remained but the scent of tobacco and old laughter. A pirate reunion, basically. Bring your own rum. You wonder if you'll ever be invited. Sometimes, at dusk, you go walking through the fields beyond town. The wind there has a touch of salt, like the sea is still trying to call you home. You pause, close your eyes, and for just a moment, you swear you hear the creak of sails, the thud of boots on deck, the crackle of lanterns swaying in the dark. You don't chase it, you just smile. In town, you're known for your calm, unflappable, someone once said, not knowing that you once stared down a British frigate with nothing but a broken spyglass and a bluff. You hear talk of new pirates. Not like you, of course. Nothing is organized. Petty thieves, smugglers, wannabes. The coast isn't what it was. Patrols are stricter. Trade routes better guarded. The wild ocean empire of Zheng Yi Sao is gone, replaced by bureaucracy,
tariffs, and the occasional over-enthusiastic customs agent. Still, the legacy lingers. You find it in unexpected places, a coin pressed into your hand by a stranger with a knowing nod, a half-familiar tattoo glimpsed under a merchant's sleeve, a coded message scratched underneath a table at the tea house, probably just graffiti, but maybe not. Historians still argue whether Zheng Yi Sao ever wrote her own memoir. Some say she dictated a series of scrolls to a trusted scribe, detailing her early life, her rise to power, and her philosophy on leadership. Others believe this is pure legend, wishful thinking by romantics who want a pirate queen's final word in her own voice. You haven't seen any scrolls, but you've heard enough stories to fill a dozen books. You've also heard news stories starting to take root. Some kids talk about Zheng Yi Sao like she's a myth, part hero, part boogie woman. They say she rode sea dragons, she could whistle storms into existence. You don't correct them. If anything, you add a few embellishments. You say, she once beat 3 Dutch captains at chess, all at once, blindfolded. Their eyes widen. You lean back, sipping your tea. Let the legend grow. The funny thing is, you've never been a nostalgic person, but lately you find yourself preserving small tokens. A coin from Malacca, a carved whistle from a lost crewman, a faded red ribbon once tied to the mast of your first ship. You don't know why. Maybe you're building a shrine to a life that's fading. Maybe you just want something to hold on to. Your hands are a little slower now. Your back twinges when you stand too fast. You're no longer the wild youth leaping across rigging with a dagger in your teeth. But inside, the storm still rumbles. You're still a pirate. You always will be. And Zheng Yi Sao? She's still out there somewhere. Maybe not in flesh, but in story, in legend, in whispered warnings passed between sailors at docks around the world. You once sailed under the black and red. You served the woman who conquered empires without ever building one, and you made it out alive. That's no small thing.
You wake before sunrise now, not because you have to, but because that's when the world is quiet enough to think. Before the market shouts and roosters crow and neighbor kids start dragging sticks along fences like tiny war drums. In those early hours, you sit by your window with a cup of strong tea and trace the steam as it curls like sails catching wind. The sea's too far to see from here, but sometimes, when the sky blushes just right, it feels like you're back aboard the flagship, watching dawn break over 1,000 masts. It's funny how the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Your back still stiffens when you hear cannons in festival parades. You still walk with a sailor sway, just slightly off balance, like you're compensating for a moving deck. And sometimes, when the wind kicks up suddenly, you instinctively check for ropes and sails, as if you're still responsible for keeping a ship from drifting into chaos. A local boy stops by today, maybe 10 or 11, missing a front tooth and carrying a wooden sword, like some half-baked hero from a village opera. He says he's heard you used to be a pirate, but like a good pirate. You chuckle. You don't correct him. He asks if you ever met the pirate queen. Your answer is automatic. Met her? I worked for her. She once threw a sandal at my head for sneezing during a strategy meeting. He gasps. You grin. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Zheng Yi Sao's power wasn't just naval.
She built a legal system, a strict code that governed everything from theft to sexual assault, with punishments as severe as execution or exile. It was harsh, but effective. Discipline meant loyalty. Order meant survival. She ran her pirate confederation like a CEO with a battle axe. You wonder sometimes if she missed the sea after she retired, if the quiet ever drove her mad, or maybe, unlike you, she actually found peace in stillness. After decades commanding storms, maybe she finally wanted to hear birdsong instead of gunfire. The boy with the wooden sword wants to know if you ever killed anyone. You tell him the truth, wrapped in metaphor and softened by time. Sometimes, when you're caught in a storm, you do what you must to survive, but that doesn't mean you forget the thunder. He frowns like he's doing the math on that. Eventually, he just nods and runs off toward the rice fields, swinging his wooden blade like a miniature hurricane. You wonder if he'll ever see a real one. Tonight, you light a small lantern and place it on the windowsill. Not for any festival, not for any guest, just for memory. And maybe, just maybe, to guide an old friend home. There's a tiny worn notebook in your drawer, bound in cracked leather. No title, just empty pages and the scent of salt water. You started writing in it. Not a memoir exactly, but fragments, scenes, fleeting moments, the smell of burning rope, the sound of Zheng Yi Sao's voice cutting through chaos, the silence after a victory heavier than any drumbeat. Maybe one day someone will read it, maybe not, but it helps somehow to put the weight down, even if only for a moment. Your quirky tidbit tonight. Some locals swear Zheng Yi Sao's fortune was buried on one of the uninhabited islands she once used as a supply cache. Treasure hunters still occasionally vanish trying to find it. You smile at that, because you know the treasure wasn't gold. It was information, ledgers, blackmail, maps. That's what kept her untouchable. She didn't need to bury coins when she owned the secrets of half the empire. Historians still argue whether she intentionally set out to create a matriarchal legacy. Some say her rise was purely opportunistic, an accident of circumstance, not strategy. Others argue that her elevation of women in her ranks, her protection of widows, and her refusal to defer to male governors suggests a more radical intent. You don't claim to know her heart, but you do know this. She never bowed, not once. Not to the emperor, not to foreign powers, not even to death. She wrote her own ending and left the rest of the world to figure out how. It's almost dark now. You pull out an old pair of boots. Cracked, soft, the soles worn nearly through. You run your fingers along the seams, remembering how many decks they've gripped, how many slippery docks they've carried you across. They don't fit quite right anymore. Your feet have changed, but you keep them anyway. Sometimes keeping is enough. A neighbor knocks. She's brought over dinner, sticky rice and pickled vegetables. Says she thought you might be too tired to cook. You thank her, and she smiles. She doesn't ask questions about your past, just leaves the bowl and tells you to get some rest. You watch her walk away, and you realize this, too, is a kind of fleet, not bound by sails or cannon, but by kindness and shared space. You eat slowly, savoring every bite. The tea goes cold beside you. Later, as the moon rises, you catch your reflection in the window, hair graying, eyes soft, a few more lines around your mouth than you remember, but the sparks is still there. The part of you that once walked beside the most powerful pirate who ever lived, the part of you that helped her rule the sea without ever needing a crown. You smile to yourself. No regrets, not even one.
You wake before sunrise now, not because you have to, but because that's when the world is quiet enough to think. Before the market shouts and roosters crow and neighbor kids start dragging sticks along fences like tiny war drums. In those early hours, you sit by your window with a cup of strong tea and trace the steam as it curls like sails catching wind. The sea's too far to see from here, but sometimes, when the sky blushes just right, it feels like you're back aboard the flagship, watching dawn break over 1,000 masts. It's funny how the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Your back still stiffens when you hear cannons in festival parades. You still walk with a sailor sway, just slightly off balance, like you're compensating for a moving deck. And sometimes, when the wind kicks up suddenly, you instinctively check for ropes and sails, as if you're still responsible for keeping a ship from drifting into chaos. A local boy stops by today, maybe 10 or 11, missing a front tooth and carrying a wooden sword, like some half-baked hero from a village opera. He says he's heard you used to be a pirate, but like a good pirate. You chuckle. You don't correct him. He asks if you ever met the pirate queen. Your answer is automatic. Met her? I worked for her. She once threw a sandal at my head for sneezing during a strategy meeting. He gasps. You grin. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Zheng Yi Sao's power wasn't just naval. She built a legal system, a strict code that governed everything from theft to sexual assault, with punishments as severe as execution or exile. It was harsh, but effective. Discipline meant loyalty. Order meant survival. She ran her pirate confederation like a CEO with a battle axe. You wonder sometimes if she missed the sea after she retired, if the quiet ever drove her mad, or maybe, unlike you, she actually found peace in stillness. After decades commanding storms, maybe she finally wanted to hear birdsong instead of gunfire. The boy with the wooden sword wants to know if you ever killed anyone. You tell him the truth, wrapped in metaphor and softened by time. Sometimes, when you're caught in a storm, you do what you must to survive, but that doesn't mean you forget the thunder. He frowns like he's doing the math on that. Eventually, he just nods and runs off toward the rice fields, swinging his wooden blade like a miniature hurricane. You wonder if he'll ever see a real one. Tonight, you light a small lantern and place it on the windowsill, not for any festival, not for any guest, just for memory. And maybe, just maybe, to guide an old friend home. There's a tiny worn notebook in your drawer, bound in cracked leather. No title, just empty pages and the scent of salt water. You started writing in it, not a memoir exactly, but fragments, scenes, fleeting moments, the smell of burning rope,
The sound of Zheng Yi Sao's voice cutting through chaos. The silence after a victory, heavier than any drumbeat. Maybe one day someone will read it. Maybe not. But it helps somehow to put the weight down, even if only for a moment. Your quirky tidbit tonight. Some locals swear Zheng Yi Sao's fortune was buried on one of the uninhabited islands she once used as a supply cache. Treasure hunters still occasionally vanish trying to find it. You smile at that, because you know the treasure wasn't gold. It was information, ledgers, blackmail, maps. That's what kept her untouchable. She didn't need to bury coins when she owned the secrets of half the empire. Historians still argue whether she intentionally set out to create a matriarchal legacy. Some say her rise was purely opportunistic, an accident of circumstance, not strategy. Others argue that her elevation of women in her ranks, her protection of widows, and her refusal to defer to male governors suggests a more radical intent. You don't claim to know her heart, but you do know this. She never bowed, not once. Not to the emperor, not to foreign powers, not even to death. She wrote her own ending and left the rest of the world to figure out how. It's almost dark now. You pull out an old pair of boots. Cracked, soft, the soles worn nearly through. You run your fingers along the seams, remembering how many decks they've gripped, how many slippery docks they've carried you across. They don't fit quite right anymore. Your feet have changed, but you keep them anyway. Sometimes keeping is enough. A neighbor knocks. She's brought over dinner, sticky rice and pickled vegetables. Says she thought you might be too tired to cook. You thank her, and she smiles. She doesn't ask questions about your past, just leaves the bowl and tells you to get some rest. You watch her walk away, and you realize this, too, is a kind of fleet. Not bound by sails or cannon, but by kindness and shared space. You eat slowly, savoring every bite. The tea goes cold beside you. Later, as the moon rises, you catch your reflection in the window, hair graying, eyes soft, a few more lines around your mouth than you remember, but the sparks is still there. The part of you that once walked beside the most powerful pirate who ever lived, the part of you that helped her rule the sea without ever needing a crown. You smile to yourself. No regrets, not even one.
Sleep doesn't come easy tonight. You lie on your mat, eyes open, watching moonlight spill across the walls like a slow-moving tide. It's quieter than usual. No stray dogs barking, no late-night hawkers shouting down alleyways. Just you and your thoughts and the soft creaking of time itself. Your mind drifts, because of course it does, back to the last storm. Not a storm of weather, but of politics. You remember standing in the doorway of a crumbling fortress out on Lantau Island, a fresh map in hand, and a dozen anxious eyes looking to you for direction. That was the beginning of the end. Not of the empire, not of the sea, but of the red flag fleet as you knew it. By then, Zheng Yi Sao had been negotiating quietly with Qing officials. A full pardon, immunity, land and titles for her, her captains, and most of the crew. A full surrender that was actually a silent victory. You didn't trust it at first.
None of you did. Surrender felt like salt in an open wound. You'd spent years fighting these people, dodging their navy, torching their ports, laughing at their hollow threats. And now you were supposed to shake hands? But she was always 5 steps ahead. Mainstream history tells it like this. In 1810, Zheng Yi Sao led the Red Flag Fleet into peaceful surrender. Over 17,000 pirates laid down arms. Not a single one of them was executed. Not her husband, not her lieutenants, not her. She walked into the Governor General's palace in full regalia, hair lacquered, robes immaculate, and walked out with everything she asked for. That's not surrender. That's power in heels. You remember the moment she returned from that meeting, calm as lake water, and gathered the crew for an announcement. She laid it out plainly. Retirement, peace, and freedom. You half expected a mutiny, but no one moved. Why? Because she'd earned every bit of loyalty she commanded, not through fear, but through consistency. She'd protected you, fed you, led you. You'd followed her into fire and come out the other side. If she said the war was over, then it was. Quirky tidbit? She demanded that every ship captain be allowed to keep their loot and open a legitimate business. Many did just that. Tea traders, fishing barons, even gambling dens. Some even used their pirate riches to fund schools and temples. But Queen had transformed pirates into citizens. It was less a transition and more of a controlled rebranding. Historians still argue whether this was a strategic masterstroke or simply exhaustion in disguise. Had she simply grown tired of the sea? Had the toll of constant war finally cracked the armor? Or was this just her final checkmate? A pivot so smooth it blurred the lines between outlaw and aristocrat. You're not sure, but you do know she didn't just disappear. After retirement, she opened a gambling house in Guangzhou, one of the most lavish in the region. Private rooms for government officials, custom tea blends, quiet rumors of blackmail. She wasn't out of the game. She just changed the rules. You visited once, just once. She greeted you with a smile that hadn't aged a day. Her voice was softer, but her eyes were still hawk sharp. She asked if you missed the sea. You said yes. She nodded. Then she served you tea and beat you in 3 straight hands of dominoes. That was the last time you saw her. And yet, she's everywhere. In the way you haggle with the fishmonger, in the way you fold your bed sheets like sails, in the way your shoulders square when someone questions your story, your worth, your past. It's funny. People always talk about legends like they're frozen in time, carved in marble. But Zheng Yi Sao, she lived. She changed. She pivoted without losing power. She grew older, not weaker. And you've done the same. Maybe not as gracefully, certainly not as rich, but you've adapted, survived, softened. You drift back into the past. You see her again, not as a pirate queen, but as a woman walking the beach at low tide, robes dragging in the sand, fingers trailing through foam. She doesn't notice you watching, or maybe she does and she's just letting you pretend you're clever. She pauses, bends to pick up something, a smooth stone. She turns it in her palm, then slips it into her pocket. That stone probably ended up on her desk, beside maps and scrolls and ledgers. A tiny weight, a reminder. You still have yours, picked up from the deck of the flagship the day you said goodbye. It's smooth and cool and lives in your coat pocket. Not for luck, just to remember. The old wooden sword leans against your door now. The neighbor boy gave it to you yesterday. Said he didn't need it anymore. He was moving on to calligraphy. You chuckled. Same thing, just less blood. He didn't get the joke. You keep the sword anyway. It makes you smile.
The world turns quietly now, and you, with your sea-worn dreams and your borrowed memories, are content to just observe. From the window, life feels distant and soft, like watching ripples instead of waves, a fitting place for reflection. But time, ever the prankster, won't let you fade just yet. A knock at your door. 3 short taps. It's the neighbor kid again. Of course it is. He's curious about pirates now. The sword wasn't enough. He wants stories, wants to know who the lady in red was and why everyone whispers about her like she's both a ghost and a goddess. So you sit him down, brew him a too-strong cup of oolong that he pretends to like, and you begin. You tell him about how Zheng Yi Sao ruled not just with power, but with paperwork. You don't skip the bureaucracy, because, let's be real, the true brilliance wasn't just the cannons, it was the systems. Most kids think pirate life meant chaos, wild brawls, endless loot. But you know better. She ran the Red Flag Fleet like a Fortune 500 company with a serious HR department. Every crew member had a code. There were rules for looting, rules for behavior. You stole from your own crew? Execution. Assault a woman? Execution. Disobey orders? Yeah, execution again. Bit of a theme there. But there were perks, too. Captains got shares based on performance. Ordinary sailors had access to common funds in case of injury. Loot was split fairly. Grievances had to be heard. Honestly, it was more progressive than half the companies today. Quirky tidbit. They even had maternity leave. That's right. Female pirates, of which there were many, could take time off for pregnancy and receive continued rations and a fair share of previous bounties. Zheng Yi Sao knew the power of retention. Historians still argue whether this strict governance was her own innovation or something borrowed from military traditions of the time. Some claim she simply adapted Qing naval structure. Others argue it was entirely her brainchild, born of necessity and ruthless intelligence. You lean in closer to the kid now. He's hanging on every word. And you say, forget the treasure chests and parrots. The real treasure was this: organization, discipline, mutual respect. That's how you command 80,000 people. He nods slowly. You can see his worldview shifting. It's not swashbuckling fantasy anymore. It's strategy, power dynamics, social engineering. He'll probably write a paper on it, or maybe a play. You smile, and then you tell him about the escape routes, the secret network of caves and hideaways scattered along the coastline. Tunnels beneath villages, caches buried in temple courtyards. The sea might have been her battlefield, but the land was her chessboard. When the Qing tried to corner the fleet, the pirates vanish like smoke. They disappear inland, blend in, hide in plain sight. There's even a story, though no one can prove it, of Zheng Yi Sao herself dressed as a rice merchant and spending 2 weeks hiding inside a monastery. You tried once to confirm that story, hiked up to the old temple ruins on a dare. The monks laughed when you asked, then gave you tea and said nothing more. But there was a red ribbon tied to a tree behind the temple, weathered and frayed. Maybe it meant nothing, maybe not. You tell the kid all this, and when he asks why it ended, why someone so powerful would just walk away, you pause, because that's the hardest part. You explain how even legends run out of space. The sea was changing. Foreign navies were moving in, trade routes were tightening, the British were sniffing around, the Portuguese were getting bold. Everyone wanted a piece of the South China Sea, and none of them wanted a woman calling the shots. Zheng Yi Sao saw what others didn't, that chaos was coming. A different kind of war. One fought with flags and ink and treaty clauses no one could understand. And she wasn't about to wait around to be erased, so she left on her own terms. The fleet dissolved, some captains went legal, some disappeared. A few tried to keep pirating and ended up hanged. But the queen, she transitioned. She evolved. You let the silence hang there. The kid gets it. He's smarter than most. He thanks you, and you hand him an old scroll with a map you're pretty sure is fake. Just a souvenir from the old days. But his eyes light up like it's real. He rushes out the door talking about starting a school project titled The Pirate Queen's Rulebook. You chuckle. Just don't plagiarize, you shout after him. He doesn't hear you. Already running. And now it's quiet again. You return to your seat by the window. The fan hums lazily. The shadows lengthen. You think about how stories get passed down. Not in libraries, not in dusty museums, but through conversation, through tea, through some kid asking the right questions. You think Zheng Yi Sao would have liked that. The oral tradition. The legacy not of violence, but of wisdom. And then you pick up your brush, because, yes, you still write. Old habits. Tonight you sketch the coastline again. Not as it is now, as it was then. With all the hidden routes, the secret ports, the ghosts of sails dotting the horizon. A little self-indulgent? Sure. But you've earned it.
You lie there now, almost motionless, listening as the silence thickens. The wind has stilled. The ceiling fan hums like a tired sentry, and your thoughts drift, trailing off like little boats at dusk, each carrying a piece of Zheng Yi Sao's story away with it. Let's rewind to what came after the pirates disappeared into the folds of history. You wouldn't think an empire as large as the Qing would just forget. And technically they didn't, but oh how they tried. Official records, sanitized, whitewashed, names changed. Her infamous title, Qing Shi, got scribbled into side margins, footnotes, forgotten scrolls. It was easier for bureaucrats to pretend she never ruled the South China Sea than to admit a woman had bent the empire to her will.
Historians still argue whether this erasure was intentional or simply the inevitable decay of memory over time. But in whisper networks and sailor taverns, her legend only grew. You can still find old sea ballads about her in parts of Vietnam and coastal Guangdong. They sing about the red sails that cut the sky, the woman who silenced thunder with her voice. The lyrics change, but the beat stays steady, like waves hitting hull. The funny thing, Zheng Yi Sao never asked to be a symbol. She wasn't out here building a personal brand. No vlogs, no posters, no statues with pigeon poop on them. She just lived loudly, made sharp decisions, and left nothing on the table. Quirky tidbit for tonight. There's an old rumor that one of her descendants ended up in the American West running a saloon. Completely unproven, absolutely delicious. The thought of a pistol-slinging bartender who makes you pay before your drink and references her great-great-grandma, the pirate queen? Yeah, you'd totally visit that bar. You take a breath now, sink a little deeper. We tend to box pirates into this neat little category: rum, parrots, eye patches, and cannonballs. But Zheng Yi Sao wasn't a cartoon. She was a strategic, brutal, and weirdly practical leader who understood power better than most men of her time. She didn't fight just for treasure. She fought for structure, order, a system of her own making. And when she was done, she passed it down, covertly, subtly, like handing off a blueprint with the ink still wet. You see glimmers of her in modern movements, women refusing to apologize for ambition, communities organizing without waiting for permission, underdogs turning systems against themselves and winning. Her methods were messy, her motives sometimes questionable, but she reshaped her world and got out alive. You don't see that often. So why don't we talk about her more? Maybe because her story isn't easy to digest. It doesn't tie up neatly. There's no tragic death, no clear villain, no shining moral. Just a woman who refused to be small. And now you hold that story too. In your mind, the sea is calmer than ever. But somewhere far away, beyond your walls, a boat cuts silently through dark water. Its sails are red. Its captain doesn't need your prayers, but she wouldn't mind your respect. You give it freely. You wake to the rocking rhythm of the ship, but this morning, it isn't the usual lullaby of waves. It's rougher, edgier, like the sea is trying to tell you something, but keeps getting interrupted by cannon blasts and petty human politics. There's movement on the water, more than usual. The Imperial Navy's gotten smarter, more organized. Their ships aren't as fast or agile as yours, but they've started moving in well-drilled formations that smell suspiciously like European strategy. And then it hits you. The Portuguese. You peer through the telescope and yep, there it is. That stupid little red flag with a white shield. It flaps smugly on the stern of a Portuguese brigantine like it just learned Mandarin and decided to colonize the vibes. Portugal stepped in to help, which, in colonial speak, means make everything worse and take credit later. They're offering support to the King Empire, but let's not pretend this is anything but a test run for bigger ambitions. They want access, trade, territory. And the Chinese government, eager to quell this maritime rebellion, basically hands over the keys to the front gate. Which means Zheng Yi Sao is now not just fighting pirates, rival fleets, and an empire. She's got literal colonizers in her rearview mirror, too. You're called to a tactical meeting. A few veteran captains sit cross-legged around a crudely drawn sea map. Zheng Yi Sao is all sharp eyes and tight posture. She doesn't blink once. She points to the coastline. She says, "They want to cage us in, so we make them think they already have." The plan? A strategic retreat, but not out of fear, out of performance. She's about to fake a massive withdrawal south, tricking both the Portuguese and King navies into relaxing their guard. Once their forces spread out, thinning their defense net like butter over too much toast, surprise. Cue the ambush. You get assigned to the decoy crew. Lucky you. You're supposed to look panicked, like you're deserting, make a mess of it, scattered north and west with the other ships as if fleeing, toss a few crates into the water, burn one or two old dinghies for dramatic flair. Basically, cosplay a pirate exodus. But behind you, that's where the real party's starting. Zheng Yi Sao lead a smaller fleet around a lesser-known route near Lantau Island. It's shallow and rocky, terrible for most ships, perfect for hers. She knows the curves of this coastline like a gambler knows the seams of a loaded die. And boom, it works. The Portuguese ships, heavy and wide, get stuck in the tight channels, vulnerable. One by one, Zheng Yi Sao's smaller vessels strike, quick and precise. Think of it like mosquito warfare, annoying, constant, and impossible to squash. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In late 1809, the Portuguese and Chinese navies attempted a joint operation to trap the pirate fleet. It failed spectacularly due to poor coordination and the pirates' superior naval maneuverability. But here's the quirky bit. Rumor has it, Zheng Yi Sao had spies stationed in Macau dressed as noodle vendors who eavesdropped on Portuguese officers boasting about their plans over drunken dumpling dinners. Historians still argue whether that's true, but doesn't it feel deliciously plausible? Meanwhile, back on your decoy ship, the vibe is weird. Half your crew doesn't know it's a ruse. They're genuinely panicked. One guy starts writing a goodbye note to his chicken. Another offers to marry the sea in exchange for safe passage. You do your best to look terrified while discreetly steering west, just like the plan says. When the fleets reconvene days later, everyone's bruised but grinning. The red flag fleet isn't gone. It's just sharper now, leaner. Fewer ships, maybe, but better ones, loyal ones, and led by someone who doesn't blink when the Portuguese start getting cocky. But here's the thing, even successful ambushes leave a cost, and morale is thinning like sea mist on a hot morning. You hear whispers again, this time not of doubt, but of exit. Captains asking what comes next, sailors quietly packing more than usual when docked. Even Chung Po Chai, golden boy of the fleet, starts hinting at alternatives. You watch as they and Zheng Yi Sao argue one evening. It's quiet, heated but controlled. You only catch fragments. No future, too many enemies. We've already won. What more do you want? And for the first time in years, the idea of stopping creeps into your brain like a slow wave washing over tired feet. What if you didn't fight forever? What if the sea didn't need you to conquer it anymore? Zheng Yi Sao. She's still not saying much, but she's watching the horizon more often than the maps. Like she's waiting for something. Or someone. Your hand drags slowly across the page now, the ink barely keeping up with your thoughts, which roll in and out like the tide, lazy, patient, full of ghosts. And you think about the strangest twist in this whole epic. Zheng Yi Sao didn't die in battle. She didn't vanish into the mist. She retired. Yep, After years of being the most feared woman on water, she negotiated her own exit. Not just survived, thrived. The year is 1810. You're in the heart of Canton, and the city is thick with the smell of sandalwood, overripe lychees, and secrets. After a final confrontation with government forces, Zheng Yi Sao does something no pirate, male or female, had successfully done before. She negotiates amnesty. Just imagine it. You standing tall before king officials who would rather hang you than handshake you. And yet, here you are, cool as ever, making deals. The Red Flag Fleet had been chipping away at imperial power for years, but Zheng Yi Sao was tired of running, tired of navigating the politics of fear. She saw the writing on the wall, and instead of dying a legend, she decided to live one. Historians still argue whether the Qing government offered terms first out of desperation, or if Zheng Yi Sao forced her hand by orchestrating her own ceasefire through political pressure and maritime dominance. Either way, the result is the same. She surrenders with style. She walks into that negotiation flanked by her stepson/husband, still weird, still effective, and essentially drops a corporate merger proposal. She'll lay down arms if her men get to keep their lives, some ships, and transition into legitimate roles: coast guards, merchants, fishermen. And guess what? She wins. Most of her fleet is pardoned. She personally keeps her riches. No jail time, no execution, not even exile. Just freedom. She reinvents herself again, opens a gambling house, probably laughs when sailors whisper her name over dice games, marries off her kids, grows old peacefully. Quirky tidbit time. There's a persistent rumor that she kept one of her old ships docked behind her house, just in case. A kind of pirate panic room. No one ever confirmed it, of course, but every now and then, someone swore they saw red flags fluttering behind the mango trees. And the truth? You kinda hope it's true, because Zheng Yi Sao retiring into obscurity feels like the universe messing with us, like if Beyoncé suddenly decided to become a librarian and never speak of music again. She lived until 1844, that's 34 years post-piracy, long enough to become a grandmother, long enough to fade from public memory, but not from legend. You picture her sitting on a balcony, watching the waves like you do now, a cup of tea, a ledger open, not recording loot anymore, but maybe tracking the odds at her gambling tables. And even as new regimes rose and fell, even as foreign empires carved up China's coastlines, no one ever dared to erase her name. You don't erase a queen like that. She didn't just survive the game, she ended it on her terms. And that, more than the battles, the treasure, or the sea spray in her face, that is her legacy. You stretch your legs, glance at the scroll still drawing by your desk. There's a subtle breeze coming in through the cracked window, the smell of salt. Maybe imagined, maybe not. And you wonder, what happened to the rest of them? The lieutenants, the cooks, the spies, the messengers who ran barefoot across islands carrying orders in braids and boots. Some became fishermen, others vanished. A few sailed west, blending into new crews, new flags, new languages. But the code? That stuck around. You've seen versions of it pop up in the most random places. Old shipping contracts, smuggler handbooks. One weird clause even made its way into a municipal document once. You smiled when you found it. Call it coincidence. Call it cultural residue. Or maybe Zheng Yi Sao just knew how to leave fingerprints on history without being obvious. And speaking of fingerprints, there's this little-known temple up on Lantau Island, supposedly dedicated to Tin Hao, the goddess of the sea. But in the back room, behind a screen, you'll find a single red fan mounted on the wall. No explanation, just red silk and faded gold. A nod to a woman who didn't need a statue, just a whisper. The fan flickers in the breeze, and you wonder if the monks know, or if they're just playing around. You've lit a stick of incense there once, maybe twice. No prayers, just acknowledgement. You're not even sure why you remember that tonight. Maybe because the sea's been too quiet lately, or maybe because stories like hers refuse to stay buried. And you realize it's not about pirates, not really. It's about choice. The choice to be feared or forgotten, to burn out or fade away, to fight or negotiate, to retire rich with your head held high. Zheng Yi Sao chose everything, took what the world denied her and built an empire, then walked away with pockets full and no apologies. And you? You close your journal, turn off the lamp. The tide outside your window rises again, gentle, rhythmic, familiar. Tomorrow, maybe you'll go back to the sea, just for a visit. But tonight, you sleep beside a legend.